Hey guys, welcome back. So in this video, we'll go through just the steps to get your model ready for texturing. So I've gone ahead and done the steps, or done a few steps, because this part can take quite a bit of time. I started this model merging and retopo this morning, and it's about 8 o'clock at night. So it's taken quite a bit of time to get to this point. Now it's it's for simpler objects. It can take quite quick time to get set up, but for some more complex things, and especially if there's issues as well, it can take some time. So just make sure you give yourself a reasonable amount of time to sort of get this ready. Now, it's not completed yet. So what I had to do here, because I was having issues with the projection, I had to make a copy of my high poly, do a few Dynameshes and a few projections to get it to this point. There's still a lot more work to do, but let's talk about how I got there. So I have these separate pieces here, and there were some issues with the model. So I'm not too sure what was wrong with them. But you can sort of see, like, it's quite laggy. I'm lagging quite a bit. I think I got some, I got this guy here, but it's lagging, right? Which means that either the system can't handle it, or there's something with the model, right? And usually these sculptures are quite hacked together, so they're not as optimized as they could be. So it's full of triangles, there's holes, or there's something wrong with the mesh. And this is the final result over here of the, the merged. And you can see that, oops, so we've got this one here, that it's visually looks very, very, very similar, except it runs very efficiently, right? So it's a much more optimized high poly model. So what I had to do with this one was, and I think what I realize is that this upper body and head was corrupted in some way. So it's sculpted fine, but there was something going on with the mesh that every time I projected, there were some errors or it would crash. And this is not the first time this has happened. So the initial sculpture is very messy, right? So I just had to Dynamesh a few things, copy, transfer, do the whole projection thing on smaller pieces, and then combine them together. So I had to do the projection process a number of times. But let's say everything works fine. What you want to do is just copy all these pieces. So your high poly sculptures, you can just highlight individual pieces that you want. Duplicate, so you have all your pieces here like this. Now it's up to you what you want to do here, but we need to start merging some things together. I would say if it's part of the body, then if it's one object, then it probably should be merged together. So let's take, for example, these three pieces here. We have the body itself, the arms, and the legs. They're separate pieces, right? And I have the nails for the hands and the feet. They're separate, and the eyeballs are separate. So I'm going to keep these separate when I project across. So I've duplicated these guys. So I had a copy of 3 of these subtools, and then I simply went to merge and merge down, so they'll all combine together, which I had ended up with this guy here, right? So you can see that these guys aren't fused together. They're just simply merged together. Now this is after the fix that I've done, right? But you can see they're not fused together, right? So they're just simply grouped essentially. So now that we have this copy, I went ahead and cleaned it up a little bit, did a few Z-remeshes to some areas, You don't have to do this. You can just simply use this model if you're happy with it. But what I ended up doing is duplicating this model and creating, or this subtool, sorry, and then creating this subtool here, which is your body retopo. So this was the subtool that I ended with. I'm going to hide these guys here. So essentially what I had was a high poly merged without any dynameshing, and a duplicate version of that. So once I had that, what I did was merge them together, right? So you can see if I press Control F, these pieces are combined together, right? Fused together. And that's just a separate subtool, but if I press Control W, it'll polygroup, it'll give everything the same polygroup. So everything is just one model here, right? So going down to Dynamesh, I Dynameshed it at the highest resolution because I was concerned about tighter areas like here that are close together. Those are the areas that you got to watch out for, because when you Dynamesh at too low of a resolution, things can start to fuse together, which you might not want. So tighter areas that are close together like here, right? So once you get that, and you need to double check your mesh to make sure that nothing's fused together, you can go ahead and zero mesh. Now, this is the part where ideally you should be creating a low poly version manually, right? But we went ahead and decided to run a automatic zero mesher. There was a few things here that I did differently in the videos and in class. I kind of used a combination of both techniques that I showed you guys, using the polygroup it method as well as using the Z modeler guide, right? So I'm just gonna show you how I did that. Oops. So preferences, just gonna reset this. So I'm gonna work on a separate subtool just for this. So let's say this guy here. So let's just duplicate this. And I'm just going to isolate this out. So you can see that this is a fairly high poly model and everything's fused together. This is basically the dirty sculpture. And I don't think these are fused together. They're just merged. So I should be able to go to polygroups and auto and just double check that. Yep. So you can see they are indeed separate. Oops. So I'm going to use this as an example. I'm going to fuse these guys together by going to Geometry, Dynamesh, and I'm going to pick something really high. Depending on your model, you might not need to go so high in resolution. And I'm going to reduce the blur to 0. Just run that Dynamesh and hopefully there shouldn't be any issues. Right? You will lose some detail and that's okay. We're not really worried about that. We're just worried about anything fusing together that shouldn't be. So tighter areas like up here, right? And we've got a bit of the nostrils here fused together, though that's not really too much of a problem. If we had fingers on this model, that's the one thing I'll be checking, the fingers and toes. Great. So what I did to guide the Z modeler is I used the paint it method as well as the Z guides method. Right, so I'm going to turn Dynamesh off because we don't need that anymore. And what I'm going to do is just start painting. So I'm going to use my standard brush, go to RGB, turn Z add off, and I'm going to just start painting, right? Making sure I'm in symmetry mode and bring that focal shift all the way to the left here. So I started painting in where I wanted polygroups, right? So probably over here would be a good start. And I'm going to increase the brush size. Oh, I'm going to have it fairly small actually. But let's just start painting in here. I'm going to have my lazy radius, lazy steps quite low. Increase that lazy radius so I can have this nice thick paint. Right. Press Alt to sort of paint the white color in. Right, it's too much. Okay, so just gonna paint around the lips here. That. Gonna reduce the lazy steps a little bit. I'm gonna paint loops around key areas. So we have the eyes. That is a key area that I want to make sure I get right. And might use a smaller brush for this one here. And I might subdivide. So I'm going to press Control D to subdivide just so I can get a really nice clear line coming here. Great, that should work pretty well, I think. And what I did as well was I got inside the eye and painted basically the thick part of the eyelid. So down here. Right. So I'm just going to paint on the inside like that. That should still work. No problems. Oops. Where am I? Okay. So I'll fix that and connect that part back up. If you wanted to, you can just draw a circle here as well. That could help create a clearer sort of loop guide for our Z remesher or Z guides that we're going to be making from our polygroups. Great. So let's get back to everything. And I'm going to continue my painting. I think you can take this as far as you want. My original one, I took it pretty far and the results were pretty good. So I pretty much painted every single edge in. So there were quite a few polygroups that I used. But I don't think it's necessary for this exercise to use that many. I just thought, why not just give it a go and see if it looks any good. All right. It's probably a bit too much. All right, so something like that. Okay, and I thought about this edge here, and I think I wanted it to sort of end down here, make that a loop around a nose, like that. So you can think of this as almost like the laugh line on a character. Then we've got the lip line, then we've got some eye loops, and then we can make a sort of eye mask up here. Now, obviously, he doesn't have much of a normal type of nose, so that can be a little bit difficult. So something like this would do, I think. And then we can create the face mask. Okay, let's reduce the lazy steps a little bit more, and the lazy radius as well. Great, let's fix this line up. Okay. And this line here, I'm just going to clean up a little bit. Great, that looks pretty good to me. We could add more lines. Like I said, in my final version that I have now, I used quite a few lines. And I'm using quite a bit less here, just because I think I used a little too much. And whilst it produced good results, I didn't think it was necessary, some of the edges that were made. All right. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is probably split this in half like this, so we have a clear edge, clear line there for the mouth. Okay, so I'm going to go to my poly paint settings in my subtool palette and go to adjust colors. And just over here, you can do this sort of method for the whole body, by the way. Not just the head, you can paint everything, but I'm just going to paint the head just for this example. I'm going to increase the red and green and blue RGB contrasting sliders, just to make sure that these lines here are as dark as they can be, right, and as clear as they can be. I'm also going to reduce the saturation as well on the HSV slider. All right, press OK to that, and it'll make it as dark as possible. Clean up any areas that you need to clean up, or that you feel like you need to clean up. So over here, probably don't need any of that. And this part here, we could probably just get rid of. Okay, so in my geometry sub palette, just going to check if everything's all good. If there's subdivision levels, I'll just delete the lower. And then I'm going to go to my menu bar at the top where it says Z plugins, polygroup it, and polygroup it from the paint borderless. So just let that go through its thing. It can take a bit of time depending on how many lines you have. Okay. So I'm going to press Shift F to bring my wireframes up, and it looks like everything has worked perfectly. Great. So I'm going to turn my poly paint off, which is over here, just so we can sort of see it a bit nicer. And Control Shift just to see that it's all working, and that looks great. So what I'm going to do here is generate ZRemesher guides from these polygroups and use that to help drive the topology, right? Because right now it's very dense. So I can go to my menu bar at the top here and go to stroke, and in curves we have different settings here. Right, so I'm going to bring up my curve mode. So I'm going to bring up my Z modeler guides, or Z remesher guides, sorry, which is BZR on the keyboard. And I'm going to go to stroke, enable curve mode, and go to function. I don't know if we need that on actually. So I turned that back off. So curve function, we want to generate curves from polygroups. So we can turn this and this off and just have polygroups on, and then press frame mesh. So you can see that we've created, basically put edges along the polygroups, which is fantastic. So you can sort of see there. So with that enabled, it's going to go to geometry, ZRemesher, and it's going to go to probably use the slider here and just go something quite low. So maybe like 5 or 6. So maybe about there. And then let's just run this. So we can try to do 2 things here. So I'm going to keep groups, press keep groups on first and see what the results is like. And then if it's not any good, then we can turn that off. And then we can sort of just play around with some different settings here. So just make sure you don't touch anything as you run this ZRemesher. Okay, not bad, not great either. So what I'm going to do, and sometimes keep groups can sort of ruin things a bit. It works really well for hard surface retopo. So I might turn that off. I kind of like the poly count. I might go around 6 with adaptive turned on. So I'm going to press Ctrl Z. Okay, keep groups off. Let's punch in 6 exactly and have adaptive turned on. That will just give us a little bit extra in areas where we might need it. So obviously that's not what we want. So I'm going to press Ctrl Z. And then let's try that again. So I might play around with these settings a little bit. So let's just increase these numbers, these settings, to see if we can just find something that would work for us. And whilst this is sort of happening, I just want to iterate that this process that we're doing right now is quite, it can be quite frustrating because you might not get the things and the results that you want straight away. And it's just a matter of trial and error. So usually what we'll do at this point is retopo this manually. We wouldn't do this auto retopology. But because we're doing an auto retopology, there's going to be some issues. So I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, so it's fairly high poly, but I think I think this will work. So we can try to go like half and see if we can sort of reduce this while somewhat keeping the poly groups or the edge flow, and that looks pretty good. Though the eyes are probably not the best, right? We can test this by bringing back the high poly model and making sure that we just have the high poly model brought back, which is in my case the whole body. So I'm just going to turn that off and bring back just the torso here. And then I'm going to go to geometry, sorry, not geometry, subtool. Towards the bottom we have project, and I just turn color off because we don't want to project the color. So what this is going to do is just project that low poly onto whatever is visible. And let's take a look at the results. So this area here definitely needs extra work. So I'm not convinced that this version that we had before is better. Though I think we might be able to ZRemesh this again. But at a more reasonable poly count. So let's try like 9 and see if that will work. Normally when it sort of goes nuts and just completely destroys itself, it's probably a sign that there's not enough polygons to support the shape that you want. Something's going on, so you just got to mess around with the sliders and press a few buttons and just trial and error, really. Okay, so this one might be promising. So I'm going to bring back the other model and just do a project just to see if this will do. All right, so I'm going to solo this again. Okay, so it's not great. I probably would bring this up a bit more. And again, it's because we're going auto, we're not manually doing this. We're going to most likely have something higher than usual in poly count. So just be ready for that. If you're just doing an illustrative piece and you're not really focusing on the technical side of things for your portfolio, then this method is perfectly fine. You kind of don't need to worry about topology, and I feel weird saying that, but you kind of don't. You do and you don't, I guess. All right, I'm just going to bring this up a little bit more. I turned adaptive off just because it might be messing with it a little bit. Okay, let's see what we could do to fix this. So let's try same. And really, we're just looking for something decent around the face, because we do kind of want to make sure that our poly count is somewhat okay. Right? We don't want to just forget about it and just go nuts. Just because we're going to be importing this into a game engine. Right, so I'm going to turn this off and just go to 20, and I have turned off symmetry. So I'm going to, for some reason I subdivided, that's alright, so let's zero mesh and see if that will work. So hopefully this is not going to crash. We'll see. So I could pause the recording, but I just don't want to press any buttons. All right, there it goes. You can see the slider up here doing its thing. Almost there. Okay. All that waiting for something that doesn't look that great. All right, so Control Z. Look, it is. I'm going to turn back symmetry on, and I'm going to run this ZRemesher one more time before I just show you my results. And the results that I have is not fantastic, but it will work. This is just the nature of doing things automatically. All right, so I'm just going to increase that poly count to something fairly high. Seems like it needs it. And then we'll probably just leave it at that if it works. Control Z. Right. So let's try to paint in this area here. just to see if we can influence the BST for, so we want to take curve mode off. All right, so I'm just going to paint this in, and hopefully we can use the guides and this painting to influence that topology. So I'm going to go back to my zero mesher, just try that again, and hopefully this will work. All right, let's take a look. Great. So this will do. It's very high poly, but it will work. So ideally this should be a lot lower, but you can play around with these settings as much as you can to get the results you want. But really, ideally, we should be doing this manually. Right. So I'm going to stop the video here, and you can get up to this point, then we'll move on to the next step.